Hello and welcome to the Reserve Team podcast, your home of all things Australian and New Zealand football. My name is Branson Gibson. I'll be your host this week. We have a mega podcast ahead of us. We'll be taking a look at all things W League this week as we look forward to the upcoming season. I'm not alone, though. On the podcast tonight, making their Reserve Team podcast debuts, we have Michelle Morris and Taryn Heddo. Good evening.
Yo. Hello.
How's it going?
Good. It's been a lovely day in Melbourne, so loving life.
How are things in Sydney, Michelle?
Oh, great. Wonderful.
Fantastic. Good to
Better
hear.
than Melbourne.
Melbourne is good as well. Going fantastically. We are not the only guests as well. We also have Reserve Team podcast veteran Sean. Good afternoon, Sean. How are you doing?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Obviously, another beautiful day here in Melbourne. And even though it is a little bit warm, even though I'm probably going to have a glass of one or too many throughout the course of this podcast, I've got this fantastic high-quality Kappa Ladies League tracksuit on, which is phenomenal. You can get your own at ladiesleague.com and click on the shop over on that store. If you do place an order, I think by December 15th, you can guarantee delivery before Christmas into the major metropolitan areas. So make sure you go and check yours out so you can look as fantastic as I look. But more than anything this week, just really keen to talk about football and keen to get some more W League content out there and on the channel. I think it's an area that we haven't covered as in depth as we can, and thankfully we've got two fantastic experts this week in Michelle and Taryn to help guide us through as well.
I think the long sleeves were perhaps a little bit ambitious, but I love your dedication. Well, we've got a big show ahead of us tonight. We're just sort of going to have a bit of a W League roundtable. We're going to talk about all things W League as we look ahead to the upcoming season. It's going to be a pretty open format. We're just going to hit on all the big talking points. Michelle, what are you looking forward to talking about tonight?
Women's football.
Fantastic.
Very excited.
How about you, Taryn? Is there anything that you're particularly looking forward to delving into tonight?
Women's football. No. Shut up. With every day that passes, the W League season gets closer and closer, and it's so exciting. We've had to wait so much longer than usual with everything that's gone on. So yeah, it's really exciting to finally be getting into sort of the depths of preseason now, and really looking forward to the season starting.
Fantastic. And Sean, what about you? What are you looking forward to the most about this upcoming W League season?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting time for the W League. One, because it's really the first time I think we've had to deal with a competing league playing at the same time. Like we've learnt with all the players heading towards England and Europe specifically, that there are now more competitive leagues around the world that are looking at our Matildas squad, which I think is a huge credit to them and how well they're playing at an international level. But then also you're like a really good advocacy for our development programs for the women's side of the game here in Australia. What I'm most interested about this season is to see how the league continues to grow and develop. Like for myself, I know Melbourne City quite well, but I don't know the league that well. There's coaches that I know their names, but I don't really know their tactical styles, the way they play, anything like that. We are, at day of recording, 933 days away from the 2023 World Cup and the expected July kickoff for that competition. I really hope that over this season, over the next couple of seasons, I can get up to date and I can learn more about how fantastic our women's football is in and around this country, because I want to be one of those expert fans once the Women's World Cup actually kicks off and we've got that tournament in our backyard for the first time in history. So yeah, incredibly excited to see how the league continues to develop and how it starts to build and leverage some of the momentum we've got from hosting the World Cup.
Fantastic. Sounds good. Before we dive into the W League as a whole, what we're going to do is start off with our mailbag question. And it's got a little bit of a foreign flair to it this week. This week's mailbag question is, what was the best Matildas overseas move? There's been a whole bunch of Matildas players all over the world signing for big clubs in England, France, Norway. Pretty much left, right and centre, there's been a big move to talk about. So, Michelle, we'll go to you first. What do you think has been the best Matildas overseas move?
Ellie Carpenter to Leon. I think that's probably one of the biggest signings, one of the best signings. She was player of the match recently. She scored a goal already. And they're just killing it over there. So I reckon, and she's so young, so she can only get better. So.
Taryn, what about your thoughts? What do you think the best overseas Matilda move was?
I was actually going to say Caitlin Ford, and I'm really shocked that Michelle didn't say that. As an Arsenal player, I saw something today. I think she's had 10 goal contributions in 10 games.
Wow.
5 goals, 5 assists. She's been really, really good for Arsenal. I think she went, we knew as people who watched, the Matildas and Australian football for a long time, we knew how good she was. But I think overseas there was a lot less fanfare for her move. But she's really been quite transformative for them and their team this season. But yeah, I would probably go for Caitlin Ford.
A great choice. And Sean, what is your perspective on this as well?
Yeah, I think both are fantastic shouts, to be honest. I think Ellie Carpenter's got a really unique opportunity where she could be the starting right back for Lyon for the next 10 seasons and be consistently challenging for divisional titles and Champions League triumphs and all that sort of stuff, knowing how strong their women's football program is. And then at the same time, Caitlin Ford, I think, has been magnificent. I think she's really shone with the opportunity to kind of step out of the shadow of Sam Kerr a little bit as far as the national team setup is concerned here locally, and show herself to be a proven goal scorer and herself to be an elite level player in that position. I think she's probably hit the ground running the best of any of that overseas contingent that we've seen go over to Europe this year. But the one that I'm going to pick is Emily Van Egmond. I think she had probably the biggest challenge to get her club selection right. If she had gone to an Arsenal or a Chelsea or whatever else, we know the quality of players that they have available to play as kind of, the main midfield playmaker in that position. I think what she really needed to make sure she did is that she went into a team where she was going to be able to play in her best role and allowed to thrive as a creative player heading into the final third, rather than being turned into something that she's not, which we do see at a club level, different to international, across all different scopes of football. I think she's done a great job though. I think West Ham is perfect for her to walk into that lineup and be the main creative hub in midfield. Yes, she's taking some time to break into that starting 11, but once she gets it right, once she hits top form, I think she's going to be fantastic for them. And I could definitely see other clubs then looking at her on the back of a fantastic WSL season and thinking, this is the person that we want to pull the strings at a Champions League level. So I think she's done a great job picking the right club and the right move to give her the right opportunity to thrive. Now we just have to kind of keep our fingers crossed that it all works out well for her and she continues to play well and be the brilliant player that we know she can be, both for ourselves and for the national team as well.
Fantastic. All fantastic answers. And it is just great to see so many Matildas players joining such big clubs. But what we're going to do now is jump into our W League Roundtable. So this is going to be a bit of an open format. So the way that we're sort of going to go about this is each of our guests is going to have a hot topic. They're going to have a few minutes to introduce and talk about it, and then we're just going to chat, essentially. So, Michelle, we'll go to you first. What is your hot W League topic?
It's the one thing that I talk about consistently and every single day, and the only thing I'll ever rant about, and that is active support in the W League and how it is lacking and how we need to do better, basically.
So tell us about it.
I'll tell you about it.
Let's go. I'm ready. I'm looking forward to it.
Raw core, solid, excellent. I tip my hat to them because they have done a really good job of, having this community and making noise at the games. And I think realistically, like their men's side, it doesn't have that anymore. They've kind of lost, whatever it was of the den. And that sucks, but it's great that the women's team has something. But then I look at, some of the bigger clubs, Sydney FC is the biggest. And then obviously you have Victory and Western Sydney there too sometimes. But we don't have active groups for them. And I think that's very frustrating because when you're some of the biggest clubs in this league, you should be wanting to support, the men's, the women and the youth, show up to all the games. And I think it's frustrating when we have these double headers because it just means that people don't show up to the women's game because, we've got a march beforehand and nobody wants to do the march at, 3:00 in the afternoon. And it's just very frustrating. But I do really hope that we do get to a point where active support in the women's game is normalized and it's big and it's growing. And that we don't have to worry about it being so family friendly, because that's the other thing. And the other issue is that it feels like these, women's matches are very family friendly and you can't swear and you can't call the other players dogs and you can't do this and you can't do that. And, the few times that we've had, some active going on at a W League game, at a Sydney FC game, we just had a security guard standing in front of us the entire time. And, it was just why? Because we weren't doing anything. We were just singing. At that point, we weren't even swearing. We weren't doing anything. We were just singing, and he was just walking back and forth and giving us really dirty looks. And But yeah, so I think, you know, we need to do better in terms of active and in terms of creating an environment that not only do children feel safe in, absolutely, and that women feel safe in, but I think it's also important to make it a environment that adults can enjoy, because at the moment it feels like I have to bring like a 6-year-old to the game, and I don't know any 6-year-olds.
So what do you think the path forward for active support in the W League is then? You sort of mentioned how, the double headers and it doesn't quite work with the March. Do you think that some of these clubs should have separate active support areas, or do you think they just need to do a better job of integrating both the W League and the A-League teams into their sort of support profile?
Well, Newcastle has done a really good job where Laurie McKenna has really made it a thing to get active going for both the men's and the women's. So he's really put himself into that and I guess really helped them to create their own active support and given them, a section for where they stand and stuff. Whereas most clubs don't have just a section for where the women's active goes. Most places don't actually have an away section for W League games, and that's frustrating in of itself. Because like if I go to an away game, I don't want to be sitting next to a Brisbane fan or a Westie. Like I don't want to be around them. I want to be with my
They
team.
should be fenced off.
Means,
they should be exclusive.
Oh, exactly. But if that means if I go to an away game and I'm the only person, sitting in my section, like at least that means that there's that, little bit of segregation where it's, you're an away fan and you're the home team. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just think that that's, even more helpful. And then that way, like if you're an away fan and there's, 3 others there, like you can hang out with them.
Well, definitely. That's the big perk of the away bay, I guess. If there's not too many away fans, at least you're all sort of gathered in that one area, so it's as opposed to sort of speckled throughout the stadium.
Yeah, exactly. But I think in terms of how do we move forward, I think honestly it's about someone taking charge and someone being a leader in that situation. And whether that means, for example, I just decide, you know what, okay, I'm just going to show up to every W League game that I can and I'm just going to stand there and I'm going to sing, and whoever wants to sing can sing with me. And if they don't have to. But I might look like a lunatic standing there going, "Full sides to the FC," by myself, but whatever, And in part of that, it means maybe talking to leaders of the existing active support group and seeing how many people from that active already want to come to a women's game and enjoy, being in that situation. Most memberships, you can get into W League games with that membership, like use that membership. So I don't know, but it takes a leader in that sense to get it moving forward.
Well, and definitely. And who do you think should be the leader? Do you think it's more on the clubs or more on the supporters?
Supporters. I think the clubs, in terms of active, don't need to play such a huge role. I think it becomes almost fake or corporate when a club gets involved in something like that. It has to be genuine and it has to come from the supporters.
Taryn, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, I agree. One of my best experiences in football, which I will bring up at any opportunity, is that I was lucky enough to go to the World Cup last year in France. And I think I know, I mean, it was in France. It was an incredible experience, but I guess one of the things that made it amazing, particularly, was that if you sort of foster this community when you go to a tournament like that. We all sort of sat together. We all had chants. Everyone sort of was around each other for a lot of the time. We went to the same pubs before and afterwards. And that sort of fostering of community is something that the W League doesn't necessarily have. And that's something that's super, super important. I guess what I would say, though, is that I think that the W League does have a different identity to the A League, and I think that women's football supporters do have a different identity to men's football supporters. I mean, a lot of overlap, but there is a distinct identity there. And I think when we talk about active, I do think it's important that it doesn't just become the same thing and the same people doing the same things. There are certain elements, and Michelle, you might not agree with this as much, but I think there are some elements in the men's game not so much in Australia, mind you, but we don't necessarily want in the women's game. We can sort of do our own thing. I think there are examples of that overseas, in the States mostly, with places like Portland and Seattle have that rivalry over there that's really genuine and is, filled with people singing and yelling at each other in non-family friendly ways and getting smashed and all the terraces and whatever. That's great. And we need that in the women's game, but we also, it can be our own thing and our own identity and, created by the fans. And I think, what Michelle said earlier about it being led by the fans is the most important thing. It needs to be led by the fans. It needs to be led by the people that go to the games every week. Yeah, I do agree. And that it doesn't mean having our own identity doesn't mean family friendly. But it does mean that there are differences, and I don't think sort of just copying and pasting things from the men's game is necessarily the way forward.
And Sean, we'll come to you as well on this. Oh, sorry, go for it, Michelle. Yeah, go for it.
I agree with what Taryn's saying. I think the most important thing is making sure we don't bring that sort of violence, macho mentality to the women's game. I think there's a really gross sort of toxic masculinity, if you will, within the men's game. That's just, even I don't like it, and there's a lot of it that I don't like. And I totally agree. Like, there is a different identity, and it's good to have that different identity. I just don't think that we need to have it family friendly.
Well, absolutely.
And we're going to delay throwing to Sean again, because I do have another follow-up question. Sean, you're just going to have to hang out there in your sweat box, in your hot, sweaty jacket. Just a follow-up question for Michelle and Taryn. We'll go to you, Michelle, first. You talk about certain elements that you'd love to see in a W League active area. What are those elements?
Firstly, people showing up in hordes, crowds. I think when you think active, I think people together singing, clapping, and enjoying themselves. Also, some of the men's games are allowed safe smoke, and I think we should be able to incorporate that into the women's game as well. I'm not saying flares. If Chrissy's listening, no flares. Flares are legal in stadiums. As much as I do enjoy them, we can't have them, but we can have safe smoke, and I think safe smoke is sick. If you do it right, it'll look great. But again, that means that then goes to Taryn's fun topic of fixtures. So and the fact that you can't see safe smoke in the middle of the day. So I mean, there's a lot of things that you can have: people singing, people drinking, people having fun. But you don't need to have a firm and organized fighting outside of the stadium, or just sexist and racist and homophobic chants. I don't think we need any of that stuff, and that's just in football.
I totally agree. Taryn, what about you? What do you think should sort of be the pillars of W League active support?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Michelle said, it's singing, it's getting together, it's that community, I guess, that I touched on, when I was talking about that time when I was in France. But having that, you go to a pub before and after the game, and you meet people doing that. You can you can create, you get enough of people together that you can do some chants, that you can make some noise together. Safe smoke, absolutely. And if you have enough people, it becomes an incredible atmosphere. And again, I'm going to use the example of Portland, because they're I guess the most prominent example of a team that does do it in the women's game. But they do have safe smoke and in front of their active, sort of bay. How incredible would that be to see that in W League? And things like tifos, all of those sorts of things can be done, but I guess it has to start with the base of creating that community in the first place. And that, can be done online, but, as I say, pub before and after the game, meet people, come together, have ideas, and then everything just sort of goes from there. Also, I want to say that there's examples of the men's game that we can work with as well. There's a few clubs in sort of the lower leagues in England that do it very, very well, that might have the sort of, maybe more like the crowd numbers that we might see in the W League, but have really, really cool active supports. And there's different clubs that do it differently. But one of the themes when you read about these clubs is that it's very tied to their identity in their community. So they'll have the same 1,000 people rock up to every game, but they've managed to foster this sort of active even in those sorts of scenarios. So I think that's something the W League can model off as well, and we can get fans and supporters to look at that sort of stuff and go from there.
Fantastic. I totally agree with what you sort of said on the community as well. I think that's such a key element for anyone in football. Once you sort of go and you get involved with supporter groups, you're hooked. Once you make that first step, you make new friends, you get involved in the action, and you just want to go back. You just want more.
Yeah,
Sean,
absolutely. And it's such a big part.
Absolutely.
Sorry,
Sean, it's no, that's right. I think the big downfall here is my shoddy internet. I don't think that's doing us a lot of favours with some of these pauses. It's a little bit hard for me to tell if my internet's cut out. So if I keep talking over people, I do apologise. There's just probably just a break in the internet, which has caused a delay, which I think indicates that it's my time to talk. But anyway, Sean, it's your time to shine now. You've been involved in and around the Melbourne City active area as well. What are your thoughts on the active support in the W League?
Yeah, I mean, magic of editing, mate. We'll take out any pauses or awkward silences or you freezing or anything like that, so no one looks at you like you're a complete fool. But otherwise,
keep them in there.
Yeah, we'll keep them in. Just keep you humble, keep you hungry for next week.
That's it.
Yeah, look, I agree with everything that they're saying, and I absolutely defer that Michelle and Taryn are better exposed to the W League itself, but my initial exposure actually only took place, one, because Melbourne City didn't have a team. Being a Foundation Heart member throughout that period, they never had a W League representative. And the first game I've actually went to was the 2015-2016 season. I can't remember what round, but it was a doubleheader game. And that was really my first exposure. I had a free afternoon. I went and watched the match, realised that it was probably the most incredible, I think, domestic lineup in Australian football that we've had at any level. The likes of Jess Fishlock, Kim Little, Jem Beattie, all those sort of players that are world-class, playing in Melbourne each and every week. And that was my real first exposure to go and watch them play and see the quality of football that was on offer. So I kind of do understand why we would want to try and get away from that family-friendly thing. And I think that's not just necessarily reflective of the W League, but the A-League as a whole and the way it's marketed. It's very much, how do we tap into those 200,000 odd kids that are playing on a weekend and get them down to games? But at the same time, I think also leveraging the different grounds available and double-headed fixtures is a key future venture for the W League itself. It's how I got my exposure to it. The challenge with Melbourne City, and I'll only speak to Melbourne City, I'm sure it's different for other teams around the division itself, is that they play some games out in Broadmeadows, which is miles away. They play some games in Fawkner. They play some games at Amy Park. And one of the things that I think Melbourne City as a club has been guilty of or accused of from fans of other sides is not really having that identity. And I think for the W League team in particular, it's really difficult if they're playing out of a different venue each week. I'm sure we'll talk about it throughout the course of this season or course of this podcast, but the season itself isn't that long. So if you've only got 6 or 7 home games and you're playing them at 3 different venues, it's really hard to kind of get that fan engagement and get that consistent support. There's not really any incentive for someone who lives in like the southeastern suburbs or the west of Melbourne to try and get across to Broadmeadows in the northern suburbs. There's just no real issue for them to go there, knowing that there's probably only going to be 1,000 people and that the club facilities probably aren't going to be completely open. So I think trying to leverage more getting people to look at it for the first time and then hoping that those people enjoy the experience and come back is a key environment for the W League to continue to grow, and in turn for the active support too as well. We've done our season preview series on the channel where, at the moment, Melbourne Victory doesn't have an active fan support at any level. Melbourne City doesn't currently have one. There's quite a few that are in turmoil. We've shouted out the Raw Corps because I think them being independent and being W League specific would have, helps them quite a bit. We'll talk about it further, but I think the Yellow Fever do a fantastic job. It would have been super interesting to see what they could have done in that same environment. But I think really trying to get clubs representing football as clubs rather than A-League and W-League specific is a key feature to get people to watch a game for a first time. And if they enjoy that experience, if they take a lot from it, I think that makes them more likely to come to the next doubleheader or to go to the next final or whatever else. And selfishly, from City's perspective, we've had very good teams for a long time. If people want to go and support teams that win, you just have to really go and give them a chance. And I think opening the eyes the first time is the key part and the part that the league needs to do better with in the future.
Michelle, Sean touched on a couple of points there where he sort of mentioned, the varying ground locations might be a little bit of a factor in sort of not driving down support, but just making it a little bit tougher. Is that something that you've experienced as you've been to W League games, that going to different venues sort of limits supporters in any way?
Oh, absolutely. I think where I live, it's very difficult to get to basically any stadium. Especially by public transport. It's going to take me 2 hours to get to Kogarah from where I live by public transport. But I do it. I do it anyway. I do it, no complaints. That's where they're playing. That's where they're playing. But then it's like, at the moment, Sydney FC is just a bit of a jumble because of all the stadiums that they're playing in already. But the W League play in Kogarah, and then they play in Leichhardt, and then they play in Cromer Park, which is great. I love when they play Cromer Park. Keep playing at Cromer Park. It's 20 minutes from my house. But then they'll also play at Wynn Stadium in Wollongong. And
right.
They do this every year. They play in Wollongong, and we always lose in Wollongong. And I think that they should just scrap it. Just no more games in Wollongong. But yeah, it really does make a difference when it comes to, finding out what your identity is. Because what is the identity? You're playing at like 7 different grounds. And I love when they play at the smaller stadiums, but, why can't we just play in one singular stadium? When Allianz is rebuilt, like, are they going to be playing there, or are they also going to be playing, the same thing, playing at Kogarah, playing at Leichhardt, playing at Wollongong, playing at Cromer Park? Like, what is going to be the situation? And I think it makes it very difficult for people to want to show up, especially when you have, games that are on at the same time. I remember last season there was 2 away games, and it was a W League and a A-League game, and they were at the same time, and I had to choose which one I wanted to watch. It's hard, and that sucks, and I think that's when it becomes an issue, when the A-League and W League are so separate from what they are.
Taryn, a question for you. One of the things that you mentioned and Michelle's mentioned as well is sort of one of the things that you've mentioned is changing the appearance of the W League as being ultra family friendly. If we sort of shift away from that, do you reckon that's going to have an impact on youth involvement with the W League at all, or not so much?
Yes and no. I mean, kids enjoy a vibrant environment as well. I fully recognize this is purely anecdotal, but I actually grew up going to rugby league games in Townsville, of all things, and every single fortnight I'd be dairy farmers on the hill, as a 5 or 6, 7-year-old, getting sprayed with beer, just swearing at the refs, going off. Maybe not so family friendly. Maybe people might be opposed to that. But as a kid, that's not the way I behaved in any other scenario. It was fun. It was some of the most fun experiences of my life, and it made me a lifelong sports fan in general. Again, it's not making it not family friendly doesn't mean distasteful necessarily. It doesn't mean
definitely.
All of these negative things that shouldn't be in any game, shouldn't be in men's and women's. It certainly, that's not what I would ever advocate for. What it means, I think, is noise and vibrancy, and I think there's this expectation. What we talk about when we say this is I guess an expectation of being quiet and sitting down and watching the game and not really engaging in it. As kids, that's not fun either. And at the end of the day, I mean, I guess another factor is kids aren't paying for the tickets, and kids aren't paying for the beer, and kids aren't paying for the food. What incentive are there for their parents to go? Yeah, I think that I can understand the point of trying to engage, this huge junior segment of, it's the most played sport, obviously at a junior level. So I can understand the sort of trying to tap into that. But I think making it vibrant actually does positively impact the experience of kids as well.
Sean, coming back to you again, what would you like to see Melbourne City do differently in their approach to a W League active area? And maybe not just the club, but the supporter groups as well.
Yeah, look, I think one of my biggest frustrations in brand, like we've gone over this topic probably 10 times throughout the last few weeks around active support in the A-League itself, is that active support at the moment, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as my perspective in Melbourne specifically, is that it feels like active support thinks it's too important to the game. And the reality is neither you or I, and I'm not sure your situation, Michelle or Taryn, we're not part of active supporter groups. Like, supportive of them, want to see them there and part of it, but like I didn't sit amongst it. I'm to the side of them and whatever else. And the Melburnians disappeared, and it didn't really change the match day experience that much at Melbourne City, to be completely honest. I would like to see, there's nothing more frustrating than a double header will happen, and we're playing like both Sydney sides for the A-League and W League teams, and then the actual active support, and I use that in air quotes really vaguely, walks in 15 minutes before the W League game's finishing. And that's a real frustration for me. I understand why we don't necessarily want to encourage kids to try and get in, but if they did something that was along the lines of kids get in free before like 5 o'clock if the A-League game kicks off at, like 7:30 or 5:30 or 6 o'clock or whatever else, to try and get people in the door to watch the W League game for free. And then if they're stuck in a stadium for 4 hours, I guarantee they're probably going to spend a bunch at the concession stand or whatever else to try and entertain their kids throughout the course of that period for the gap between games, whatever else. I think there's more they can do in terms of getting people just through the door. I think that's the big challenge. There's so many people that would probably be dismissive of the W League, even though it has more Australian representatives than any other domestic league in Australian sport. It has more international athletes and more international representatives, probably more World Cup appearances and international tournament experiences than any other league or sport or code or whatever you want to call it in Australia itself. But the challenge is getting that first set of eyes on it and getting that initial set of eyes to have a look at the game and hopefully enjoy the match day experience. I think it's kind of a domino effect though. Once you get those people in the door and you consistently get 1,000 people at each of the home games, then you start to cultivate that environment, then you start to cultivate that active support, then you start to get, families, parents, kids, single people, whoever else, more comfortable moving into that active environment and making it louder and brighter and whatever else. I think, there's a domino effect to it. I don't think there's any solution that effectively drops 200, 300 active supporter fans in every W League fixture across the division. But I think they can take small steps just to try and get people through the door and make it more accessible as a competition. And we could rant about this for 45 minutes if you want to brand like the social media exposure of the W League. But, it's very hard to find information on the W League on the internet. It's hard to find it even on the Twitter channels of the Matildas and the W League itself. They just released today for the first time the current squad lists for the W League sides. It was about 5 hours before we started recording. They need to take those tiny steps to get people more interested and more aware of the competition. And that's really the first step I'd want to see, not just from the W League overall, managing competition, but from each individual club, take more responsibility for promoting and getting the quality of the competition out there.
Michelle, this is your roundtable topic. So is there anything else that you want to touch on in regards to this?
I'll just go on what Sean was saying. I actually am a member of the Cove, so that's why for me it is a big deal. Like I am every week in the Cove. So for me, that's why I am very much attached to this sort of situation. And for me, when it comes to football, it's so much more than just like what's happening on the pitch. So, and I think that the supporters, the active supporters, are part of the entertainment, and we're part of the reason why people should be coming to games. And yeah, I mean, that's why people go into the Western Sydney Wanderers games, because people wanted to see the RBB. And as much as I hate them, when they first started, they were incredible. They were huge, and they had flair, and not flares. They had flair, and they were loud, and it was great to see. It was good for the league. If you imagine having something like that for a W League team, like that would be insane. That would be nuts, And I think an ideal situation would be that we have things like that, but for W League teams, and I think that would be incredible. So get amongst it, join an active support team, support your club, become a member.
Well, you've sort of hit on it there. What I was going to ask you before we move on and wrap up this topic, what would be your big pitch to people to get involved with their W League active support groups?
Oh, don't be shy to talk to new people. Don't be shy to stand out and to want to sing. If you want to sing, sing. Don't be embarrassed. That's like me talking to myself as well. Because I want to go to these W League games and I want to sing, but I want to sing songs that aren't from like primary school athletics carnival. So, yeah, get amongst it. Enjoy yourself at a W League game. Don't be afraid of security and little children running around you.
All right, so taking a look back at the Hall of Fame results from last week, in third place we had, with 13.6% of the vote, Neil Kilkenny's Braces. In second place with 16.7% of the vote, we had Ryan Grant in goals in the ACL for Sydney FC. And then in first place, I mean, let's be honest, was it ever really in doubt? Don't really think it was. Emphatically too, with 69.7% of the vote, Marvin is our inductee this week into the Reserve Team Hall of Fame. And Sean, I believe that is the largest ever results in the Reserve Team Hall of Fame. Marvin getting the most ever, the highest percentage of votes.
It is both the highest percentage of votes and the highest winning margin, but you haven't won 5 in a row, buddy, so I would be calming right down until we get some nominations out of you. But we do also have to give you a small golf clap into the microphone so we don't ruin the audio for our Spotify listeners. But you also are the first person to get your nominee to respond to the poll that particular week.
Yeah.
We got a like from David Squires in week 1 as the inaugural Hall of Fame inductee. Simon Hill blanked us, but apparently chats to Rose all the time at all sorts of writers' festivals. Alessandro Diamante probably swung into our DMs on Instagram, but I don't have the account password. And Ellen Borian didn't reach out either. A-League Memes, I think, are about to challenge us to a preseason friendly game or something like that. We'll beat the living shit out of them. That'll be great. But Marvin has gone one step above. He must have actually watched last week's episode because he responded to the poll itself saying at Branson Gibson is all right. So if there is an impending zombie apocalypse or anything like that, Marvin's got your back. You're going to have a safe place to go and hide next to him.
That immediately went onto the top of my professional resume. That's all any potential future employee needs to know. Marvin gives me the tick of approval. That's all I need. But, that is a result befitting the great man. 69% smashed it. Emphatic. Jumping on now, what we're going to do is dive into hot topic number 2. And Taryn, we're going to go to you. What is your W League hot topic?
So the thing that I wanted to talk about this week was the W League fixtures. We've touched on it quite a lot when we talked about the active support, but it's something that's super important. It's something we bang on about every single year. So obviously this year, bit of a shortened season, bit of a disrupted season. We were never going to get a full home and away season. However, it's still disappointing. You still look at it and you still kind of go, no full home and away season yet, no expansion yet. One of the factors of players moving away from the W League, one of the big things that everyone's been banging on with year after year after year after year is this no full home and away season. So hopefully we see that next season. Obviously there's a huge caveat this season given the circumstances in which it's being played. But that's, I think, the first thing to bring up. The second thing to bring up, which we banged on a lot about in the Ladies League pod that we recorded last week, is afternoon games, and that ties into doubleheaders. It's a summer season. Obviously, we're looking to move to winter. Right now, it's a summer season. The vast majority of the W League games are in the afternoon, with the exception of Thursday nights, which I think are a great idea. I really enjoy them. Even though, yes, here in Melbourne, the games are all over the place, I do quite enjoy sometimes going to a game at Broadmeadows or something on a Thursday night and sitting on the hill. It's quite a nice experience. Pretty much every other game is an afternoon. Tied into that is pretty much every game. Quite a lot of games are double headers. So including the very first game of the season. This is something that consistently frustrates me. I understand double headers to an extent. I understand that they are a cost-cutting measure. In many cases, you have one place for the broadcast. I understand why they happen. It's also an introduction for some people into the W League, which can be important. However, to have the first game of the season after such a build-up, after such a huge thing, as a doubleheader is really insulting. To be blunt, it's really insulting. You have this huge build-up to the A-League, and I think they've done that right. Macarthur, Western Sydney, it'll be a big game. It'll be, hopefully very well attended, hopefully sold out. To just put the opening game of the W League as a curtain raiser to this is annoying. It's insulting. You could have had a huge event of the W League on its own, and that's not been the case. I think I'll stop that there as a bit of an introduction. I can go more into double headers, but we'll let other people speak about the fixtures and what they think about them.
Well, I'm sure we'll definitely circle back to you, but we'll go to Michelle now. What are your thoughts on the W League fixturing?
Rid of double headers. Stop. No, I agree with what Taryn's saying. It is, it feels very, very underwhelming when you are trying to promote this league and when you have just been given the bid for the Women's World Cup and your league still can't even have like a home and away season and no proper advertisement about the fixtures or anything like that. It's I don't know. I'm not happy with it either, and it's very frustrating that a lot of the games are on weekdays are at like 4:30, and I'm stuck at work and I can't go. For example, the first Sydney FC game, I won't be able to go because it's at 4:30 kickoff on like a Thursday.
Sean, what are your thoughts?
I'm feeling pretty warm, Brand. I'm actually going to take this jacket off, and thankfully I've got underneath this beautiful long sleeve away reserve team jersey, which is available to purchase on the ladiesleague.com. If you just click on shop on that website, you too can get one for Christmas and put it under the tree. It's the gift that everyone wants across the soccer Twitter this year, but thankfully it's going to breathe a lot more. I'm going to be in a much better space to answer this question. But look, I'd echo the same sentiment. I think we covered on Weekend Recap, and apologies, Brand, for plugging my show and your show, but we did actually kind of go through the Melbourne City fixture list. And there's two big things, and one I'll talk about further once we get to my topic in the division itself, but it's a really short season. Like, we've already talked about the heat of summer and how difficult that is and the benefits that are going to come from the move to a winter football season. There are challenges, but I think there are largely benefits, particularly for the women's competition. But it's only 14 weeks, and that's a finals additional to that. Even if you make it all the way through, it's only 17 weeks. So the teams that are going to struggle in this division, that are in rebuilds, that are trying to blood young players, they're not going to get enough exposure to football at a high quality level, at an elite level throughout the course of this season. And that's the real challenge. One of the things that we've complained about, not just at W League level, but at A League as well, is like the poor fixturing that we always see. There is always a Melbourne derby or a Sydney derby or a grand final rematch in the opening week of the season. We just don't need to see it. If people have gone 6, 7, 8, 9 months, because next year we're going to experience that longest off season of all time without seeing football, they're going to go watch whoever they want to play. That we don't really need to have round one, as Taryn mentioned, a double header fixture for both leagues. It would be more than sufficient to have Sydney FC fans going to watch their side play against any team because they've missed their football for that long a period. Same for the A-League sides as well. There'd be more than sufficient for Melbourne City to be playing any team in the division. We'd go along and watch it, having missed the game throughout that period. The best thing that you can do for the level of the competition, from the players being up to date and up to match fitness, is have those big games, those key matches, like those top tier sides in any competition, play each other in like season rounds 5, 6, 7, wherever else, where they've hit their straps, where they've picked up a few wins, where they understand what it is. And then for the same thing for the crowds will go and watch those games if they know that there's a big fixture coming up and they've got it marked on their calendar and whatever else. One of our big frustrations is that there's always a feeling that the A-League never markets itself well, the W League doesn't market itself well in terms of building up hype for round one, and then they try and recover it late on in the preseason by scheduling big games as round one fixtures, and it doesn't benefit anybody. People that potentially are neutralised, and I spoke about it earlier when we were talking about Michelle's topic, getting neutralised to watch a game, a round one fixture between Melbourne City and Sydney FC is not going to be as entertaining as a round 6 or round 7 fixture would be, because those teams are still in their pre-season mode, they're still working out the kinks. People might go to that game and see the quality is not being as high, and then therefore not go to future matches. So yeah, I'd echo the same sentiments as Michelle and Taryn. Like, they really need to do a better job of their fixturing each season and try and build momentum throughout the course of the year, try and build to a crescendo. That's even outside of just the fact that we play a 14-round season. We need to get that to 28, we need to get it to 32, we need to get it to 36 before we get to the 2023 World Cup. Doing that in 2023, that's not going to do anything to improve our chances. It's not going to do anything to improve the legacy of the game. We need to be bold and we need to take those steps now. And that just takes someone being brave enough to pull the trigger. It's a side note, but we know that the A-League and W-League are moving to independence, and it's been like delayed 100 times now for whatever reason. I think Sydney FC CEO Danny Townsend was on Twitter today, as recently at time of recording, talking about the fact that it's still not an independent A-League, it's still not an independent W-League. The season kicks off in 17 days. Like, we don't have time to be dicking around with this stuff. And as I mentioned at the start in our intros, 933 days till the Women's World Cup. We should have been taking steps to try and work towards that 2 years ago, not now. So we're already kind of behind the eight ball in that respect. And you just want to see and you want to hope that people like James Johnson, who do care about football, I believe that he does care about football, people in and involved the women's game, in and around the W League squads, can actually start to get that traction to make those key changes to the competition and make those key changes to their teams to benefit the game in the long run, above and beyond, not just 2023, but into the future as well. Because we all want to support the competition, we all want it to do well. But at the moment, I think we're all frustrated by the bureaucracy that comes into something as simple as who's playing who in the first game of the season, which is crazy to talk about.
Taryn, what do you think with the W League being aligned with the A League? Do you think that's beneficial in terms of a fixed league structure point of view, or do you think it's more detrimental to the W League?
I sort of have. I would actually say it's detrimental, and this is a view that I have. And as a caveat, I'm someone who is very much a women's football fan, far and above a men's football fan. I don't have anywhere near as much interest in it, and so this is speaking from that kind of viewpoint. I think there is a detriment, and it's something that I've been banging on about for a while. And it goes back to identity. It goes back to identity, what we were talking about before. It's very difficult to build community and to build that kind of identity when you're essentially riding off the coattails of another club. It's always, in any situation where there is a men's and women's team, it is the first team, it is the men's team, and then the women's team. It's always secondary. And that has always bothered me, because as much as we say that needs to change, I don't think in this current structure that it possibly ever can. Now, this is me banging on. It's never going to change, I don't think. I don't know if there's any kind of will or any kind of incentive to decouple the two things. And as Michelle's mentioned, it's, if you're a fan of a club with an A-League team and a W-League team, you like being a fan of both of those teams, and that's a really cool thing that you can do. I think if we were to tear it all up and start again, I think having a wholly independent W League with that you're able to build up your own identity and your own structures, and then you're not burdened. Then you can have a Friday night game. One of the things, that's something that I don't think the W League ever has. It has Friday afternoon games, maybe as part of a doubleheader. A Friday night game, groundbreaking. A Saturday night game on its own, groundbreaking. That solves a lot of the problems of you're flicking through your TV and you can see a women's game. In the current setup, that's never going to happen, because you can't clash the two teams, you can't clash the two leagues, you can't clash the two games, because we're assuming it's all one audience. Yes, there's a lot of overlap. I would argue that it's not one audience, and maybe someone with more of a sort of, with the actual stats and figures and marketing can prove me wrong. But that's just the impression that I go by. So yeah, it's a little bit, I don't think they'll ever be decoupled, but I do think that it doesn't benefit the W League, and it doesn't benefit the women's game, not just in Australia but worldwide, to be so coupled to men's clubs the way that we are at the moment.
And what do you think, Michelle? What are your thoughts on the way that the W League and the A League are linked?
I don't mind. For me, it's so different, because I've always had that idea of one club mentality. You follow the same team. Everyone wears the same colors, and that's how it is. It's a community. It's family. For me, saying that I can support Sydney FC. I don't mean that as I just support the men's team. I say that as I support the women's team as well. And same with Arsenal. Like, I like the Arsenal women's team at this point much more than the men's team. But you know what I mean? For me, maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just like my mentality is that, these clubs are the mentality should be that it is one club. It shouldn't be Sydney FC men's and Sydney FC women's. Like, it should just be Sydney FC, or Melbourne Victory or Melbourne City, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it should be that way. It's not, unfortunately. And like, I totally understand where Taryn's coming from. It's not that way, and it sucks because it does mean that you have a lot of these incels who are like, oh, women can't play football, and who goes to women's games anyway? And it's like, well, very obviously lots of people do. That's, they have a team, so people go watch them. But yeah, I mean, look, if we're going back to the fixtures, I think, yeah, it is frustrating that these girls can't play, a Friday night or a Saturday night game because the men's teams are playing then. And, I think it would be great what if the men's team was the curtain raiser? Have them play at 4:30, have the girls play at like, prime time. And, I reckon people would stay back and watch that game. I think it would just be better and it'd make more sense, because if people are coming for the men's game, then you are more likely to stay for the game after, because it's essentially a free game. But I don't know. I think there's a lot of issues with the scheduling in terms of the NWSL and the NPL. And I think that has been a big issue for this season specifically, with, I think, a lot of players coming from the NPL and needing to return to their NPL club at the end of the W League season.
What are your thoughts, Sean? You sort of mentioned that your first real exposure to the W League through Melbourne City was through a doubleheader. They're not getting a lot of love at all at the moment. Do you think they have a place in the W League, A-League linkage at all? Can anyone else hear him?
No.
Okay.
That's good, because I just said so much like racist, controversial stuff that I immediately wanted to take it back anyway. So it's absolutely perfect. No, but I think Michelle just absolutely hit the nail on the head, where we're in this weird time right now where we know that we're about to, in the 2020-2021 season, go into 7, 8, 9 months of off-season, because we're trying to align ourselves with the other things. If we imagine like a huge spider web that is Australian football, everything's intertwined into whatever else, we desperately need a TV rights deal that doesn't bend us over a barrel every single time, because I think, and I'm going to put my devil's advocate hat on, but it's all going to sound hollow and fake because I don't mean any of it. But, we're in a scenario now where reality is Fox Sports dictates who kicks off first and who kicks off last. I would so much rather watch the A-League side for Melbourne City get beaten 3-0 by Perth Glory, and then watch us, win 5-0 against Perth Glory's W League team each and every week, so that I go home a happy man. But, the reality is, at the moment, the way things are working, it's done entirely for TV rights deals. I think exactly what you mentioned, Taryn, with the early kickoff stuff, I think that can be resolved by a stronger TV rights solution. We have seen, and we are keeping our fingers, toes, arms, eyes, ears crossed, whatever you can cross, that we get a better TV rights deal for the W League and A-League next season. We're seeing a whole lot of other, different online platforms, on-demand media coming through. Shout out to some of the Attack the Bot crew, not all of you, know who I'm talking about, as far as getting the Champions League rights for the women's program this season. That's going to be fantastic to see that be more accessible from an online perspective this year. That's really what the W League needs. It needs to be able to stand on its own 2 feet from that rights deal. I think the challenge becomes Football Australia looks at it as, we have our best leverage and we have our best way to encapsulate the most monetary revenue by selling Socceroos games, Matildas games, A-League football, W League football, potentially in that order. And that may not necessarily be the reality in terms of the audience capture or the market that's out there for them. We don't need more business people making decisions in football. We need more football people making business decisions. That's what's going to drive us further the next part. The part where I will put my devil's advocate hat on is exactly what Michelle mentioned. I don't think we're in a position right now, as far as the quality of the league is concerned, where we've just had all these people go to Europe, we've just had all these people go to North America that are the key pillars of the league itself, where we have the ability to then cannibalise our NPL competition at the same time. So while personally I would love to see the way the men's competition works, and again I'm only speaking for Melbourne and the Victoria area, is that Melbourne City has an A-League side and then they have an NPL competition side, which is effectively their development squad, their under-23s. They don't do that for a W League level. The WNPL in Australia, or in Victoria more specifically, doesn't have Melbourne City representatives. It doesn't have Melbourne Victory representatives. It doesn't have a Western United representative. If they want to take it seriously, if they want to get to that elite level and that elite academy structure, they need to add year-round competition for some of their most promising youngsters, and that might still be an under-23 competition in an NPL level. But I think the challenge that they've got right now is our elite players, the best players from the W League, are currently playing in Europe and are no longer accessible to the W League season, which is fantastic. That's where they should be. That's where we want our Matildas playing, to be in the best position for the next World Cup. But then you've got kind of that second tier, that progressive tier, which is going to play the W League season and then head to North America. And then you've got that tier beneath that, which is probably our most promising young talent, which is going to play the W League season and then head to NPL competition to try and get their full year of football and continue their development. So I think 2020, 2021, hopefully, fingers crossed, we look back at as being a particularly unique year. And then next year, when we're doing this same conversation, hopefully with the same group in 12 months' time, we're talking about the success of a winter competition and what that benefits that's going to offer to everybody. And we talk about A-League clubs and W League clubs and football in Australia, not just looking at it as being a W League competition, but putting the development structures in place for women's football to have NPL representation and to have a variety of different things going on. We do it for the men's game, and we've never had a fucking World Cup. We barely qualify for them. So why aren't we doing it for when we've got a W League competition, a women's World Cup taking place within 3 years? It's crazy. Again, I don't have that much cash, so I can't bankroll a W League team, but hopefully the people that can and that are in positions to are listening along and starting to understand what's best for the game into the future.
Well, and just quickly touching on that, you mentioned, the W League, WNPL academies, that sort of stuff. Shout out to Western United. I did see it reported on SBS The World Game this week that they've been in touch with Calder United, who are NPLW powerhouses here in Victoria, about establishing a women's football academy. So don't know what that's going to look like, but it is good to see an A-League team sort of taking that kind of step in regards to W League and WNPL and a women's academy as well. Taryn, a question for you. What would an ideal W League fixture look like?
Full home and away, firstly. I mean, that's pretty just full home and away. Probably even more than that. I think in winter. And I think that, what we sort of talk about the standard of the game, that's kind of separate, I guess, to getting people involved and getting people watching the game, because if we don't follow football for rational reasons. If we were only supporting the best teams and the best standards, none of us would ever watch the A-League or the W League or any kind of Australian football. That's not, we don't support.
I don't want to interrupt you, but you're on the podcast with a Sydney FC fan, so I don't know how much we can actually claim that to be true in any respect.
As you were, Taryn.
I had to get Michelle back because she earlier said Sydney FC is the biggest club of the country, and we all just sat there and let her speak, and none of us jumped in at any point. And now that's going to be out. Once stuff's on the internet, brand, we're screwed. That's it. You and I are never going to be prime minister or president of any country because that's now out there for people to bring up in the future. I
was going to be a gracious, respectful host, and not comment on that.
I said it for the bait, and no one took it.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm just going to go with it then.
Mate, you're lucky that was 2 glasses of wine ago and that I was accidentally on mute. Otherwise, I would have been right on you.
And just so you know, notes were taken on my little jot pad here, so that didn't just go through to the keeper. It was keenly watched on its way through to the keeper, saying, throw that one up there again, and we're going to send that down to the boundary. Anyway, we got to...
Yeah, apologies, Taryn. I can't keep letting her get away with this stuff, man. We just got to call her out on it.
And I just very, very quickly, I am glad. I thought you were going to interrupt and say, when Taryn said we don't go for teams because they're good, I thought you were going to have a Fulham dig. So I'm glad they escaped that one. Taryn... So an ideal W League fixture. So you think move it to winter, full home and away. What else?
Yeah, I would like to butt in there and say in the A League I support the Mariners. So I'm not. I know all about crap teams and kind of
used to be
no rational basis to support. Yeah, the glory days of the cannon. Oh goodness. Anyway, yes. It is true. You know, yeah, people don't support things rationally. So I don't see like the standard of the competition can be seen as an issue in terms of play development, but I don't so much see it as an issue in terms of getting eyes on the game. I think people get emotionally attached to things in irrational ways. They're not, you know, necessarily going to watch the W League more if it's the best league in the world or if it's not. I have a really interesting analogy for this in that my father actually works in the horse racing industry, and one of the things he would often talk about is, you know, people would go, oh, this horse is coming from Europe, and oh, what a better race that will be. But actually, the reality is no one's betting more on the race because there's a horse from Europe. No one cares. There's a very small segment of people that care. And if we're if we're you know getting outside eyes onto the W League, I think that applies as well. Yeah, winter season, full home and away, expansion. Expansion is also really important for the W League. I need the Mariners to be back in the W League. It's something that is so deeply important to me. I feel like I need an anchor. I need an anchor for my W League support, and the Mariners being back would absolutely be that anchor. I think the Knicks being in the league as well would only be positive for it, especially with the 2023 World Cup being a combined Australia-New Zealand World Cup. I think having them in would be super important as well. Add some more teams, add some more fixtures. I want to say get rid of double headers. I hate them. I really hate them. I find them... I understand the argument about getting eyes on the game, but the W League's been around for a very, very long time now. I think if you are an A-League fan and you haven't engaged with the W League, I don't know that double headers are going to make you engage with the W League. I think it's a way to create our own identity away from the A-League is sort of binning double headers. But I understand some might come in. Just don't have them for like the first game of the season. Just, if we're going to have them for kind of anonymous games throughout the season if you want to cut costs. Don't have it for the first game of the season and try to avoid 5 p.m. Friday kickoffs, please, for the love of God. It's a real bugbear. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Michelle, what's your ideal W League fixture look like?
Yeah, I think if we can get away from the NWSL, I think full home and away in winter would be ideal. I think for any football fan and anyone who's ever played the game, in hot weather, I think we all agree that playing in hot weather sucks and it's hard and it's tiring and it's not fair for those girls to be playing in that kind of heat and the guys as well because, you know, it's hot. And I think playing in winter would just be better. It'll just flow so much better and it'll just be much more fun. I think, you know, during COVID, when we were playing in winter, it was so much more entertaining to watch. And it was just easier to watch as well. And also I want to wear like big jackets when I go to a football game and pretend that I'm a proper ultra. But I'll say this with the double headers. Look, I don't mind if it's, you know, the same teams that are playing. So if it's like a big blue doubleheader, it's a proper big blue doubleheader, you know, Sydney versus Victory, and that'll be cool. But one time I went to a doubleheader just to watch the women's game and in Newcastle, and it was Sydney versus Newcastle for the women's, but then it was Newcastle versus, you know, some other random team that wasn't Sydney. And I was like, why did I just pay like, you know, $30 to go watch the men's team play when I'm not even here to watch the men's team? I just want to watch the girls play. I literally left after the girls finished because I don't care about Newcastle. I just wanted to see Sydney FC play, and they won, and I was happy, and then I went home. So, yeah, I don't know. I think if you're going to do a doubleheader, at least make it so people who are there to watch it are supporting both teams, or, you know, at least have some sort of connection to both teams. But yeah, I think we can all agree home and away in winter would be ideal, the best. Get away from the NWSL. I can't say this enough. Get away. Go away from the Americans. Leave them alone. Leave us alone.
Sean, what are your thoughts? Oh, yeah, sorry, Taryn, go for it.
Just to jump in, something
No,
that we
Sean
haven't
interrupted
actually...
you before. You go for it. Jump in whenever you want.
Every time.
Something that we haven't
The minute that Michelle starts talking, like, Brand just mutes me. That's why he's the host. That's why he's the admin. Like, we've got a process going.
Love that. Something that we haven't actually talked about in terms of fixtures, in terms of everything, is like professionalism. Like, you can only get away from the NWSL is if you're paying people properly. You can only play a full home and away season is if you're paying minimum wage to make it their job, and therefore you don't have to worry about the NWSL. And I thought, we haven't touched on that, but that's actually like the most essential ingredient of all of this, of all of our whole wish list, is that, you know, you have to have that money there to pay people at the very least, you know, a minimum full-time wage to do their job. That's super important.
Sean, floor's now yours. You're off mute. You're ready to go. Our interruptions are poised and ready to go. We're going to tear you to shreds. You're not going to get more than 4 sentences in, I reckon. But what's your ideal W League fixture look like?
You got to challenge me more than that. You should have told me that I get one haiku, and then I've got to come up with like some sort of rhyme scheme or something like that to get my point across. But look, I'd echo the same sentiment. I think the interesting portion that, first I'll touch on Michelle's thing. We're currently in the summer of TLL. The winter of TRT is going to be nothing but padded jackets and handsome peacoats. Trust me, I'm like that winter handsome type of guy. Like, we're going to have so much great kit coming out that year. It's going to be the best. But anyway, that's a future marketing opportunity. I'm sure our overlay is not watching and will not tell me that I can't do any of that, but we'll figure that out in future weeks. But I think the big thing that we've learnt over the last 12 months is that the shift in the overall global women's game is not heading towards North America, it's heading to Europe. And that's where we're starting to see that investment come through for a variety of those big clubs that we've spoken about. We spoke about Lyon, we've spoken about the Women's Super League and how that's changing the game as far as Australian professionals are concerned. Brexit, and this is a whole other podcast topic I could go into for another 6.5 hours, but you know, that's going to change the way that they recruit into England specifically. It's going to be just as easy for them to try and pull an Australian talent as it is to get an Albanian talent or a Spanish talent or whatever else because of the changes to their migration and visa program. So that's huge for us. Selfishly, that's huge for us because we're not going to have the same limitations to getting into elite competition that we've had in previous years. I think now, and the part that Michelle's touched on, is that we can get away from North American football. We don't now have to set up a league where we've got... Was that like a weird gong or something that anybody heard?
Believe it was a car driving past. That's my guess.
It sounded like someone just walked up to the top of a mountain and just banged a gong, and it just like reverberated for a minute or two.
The newest segment to the Reserve Team podcast. Sorry?
Station Street, Thornbury.
I thought you were going to say that's the Uber Eats that brought you 3 more cans so you can just get through the rest of the recording.
What we're going to have now is the newest segment addition to the Reserve Team podcast, the mystery sound. What's going on in the background? Could be anything.
I thought you were going to say now we're going to do like a Vox Populi, like where you get a random opinion and it's just the Uber driver comes in and tells us what he thinks is going to happen in the upcoming W League season. That'd be perfect.
Imagine that. That'd be good. Mystery roundtable. Who knows what's going to happen? Anyway, carry on, Sean.
Yeah, but I think that shift in the global power of the women's game shows that we're probably not going to be a North American-based league. Our W League season being in summer absolutely perfectly complemented those players making a full-time wage, as Taryn spoke about, by going over to North America and playing for a club there for 6 months of the year. That we've spoken about at length, the fixture list being, 7.5 weeks long, 14 games, whatever else, not being acceptable heading into a World Cup cycle. But now I think that transition will come is we'll move to a winter competition, and then during our summer period, it'll become a European competition. We'll see more players going and playing in Scandinavia, in continental Europe, in the WSL itself. We've seen players go over there and play to a very high level. Like, I think Hayley Rasso, we haven't spoken about at any point. I'm a huge fan of Ribbons. Like, she's smashing it with Everton at the moment. We spoke about Van Egmond doing very well with West Ham. Obviously, the big Joe Montemuro connection at Arsenal is going to reap continuous rewards for Australian football as well, as long as he's in that role. I think we're going to see a huge transition for the W League, moving towards being more European-centric as opposed to more North American-centric, because fuck America. Who gives a shit? We've got our own World Cup in 3 years.
Yeah, I hate the Americans, honestly. Go away.
Listen, I've seen the analytics of the Channel brand. We're not resonating in that market anyway. We might as well write them off now.
Sean's taken no prisoners. I mean, just keep drinking the wine, mate. Just let it flow. Taryn, this is your hot topic. Is there anything else that you would like to touch on before we move on to our next segment?
Not really. I think it's all been covered. I maybe to talk about something positive, because a lot of it is just me like complaining and being like, oh, it should be like this.
Well, that's what Sean does every week.
It's healthy to vent, for our natural health. Like, we need to, as football fans, stick together and just vent about random shit each and every week. Do you think I haven't heard it? Okay, now I'm going to pull it to you, Bran. You think I haven't heard about every Fulham penalty taken so far this season? I've heard about them all for 45 minutes at a time. Bran just goes off each and every week.
Are you going to tell me you haven't want to heard it? You haven't want to listen to that? I mean, I'm finding that difficult to believe. And lastly, I will just touch on it. It's probably important for you in particular to vent, considering how hot you must be in the long sleeve shirt and the long sleeve kappa jacket. I mean, it's a small price to pay for fashion, but ventilation is very important on your end. And so, Taryn, go for it.
Yeah, something positive is the Thursday night games. They're all over the shop. They're not in one consistent place. That's really annoying. They're all, we all know all the negative things. But I love the Thursday night games. And if you're in Melbourne, like, hit me up on Twitter. Let's go to a Thursday night game wherever it is, and sit on the hill, have terrible beer and terrible food, and just enjoy the game. I think it's one of the sort of rare joys. I do really love those games, and I really love that they're continuing into next season.
Moving on to the Hall of Fame, there is still plenty of space available in the Reserve Team Hall of Fame. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and get our nominations for this week's vote to see who will join the illustrious crew in our Hall of Fame. Taryn, I will go to you first. Who is your nomination for the Reserve Team Hall of Fame?
So my nomination is an incident that happened a few years ago now, the Lisa Devanna water bottle incident, where she went to take a drink out of the water bottle at the Olympics, and then it was KK, Lisa Cullen-Knight, I believe, who had to flip it around for her. The gift makes the rounds every few months. Yeah, it's an all-time classic. So that's my nomination.
It's up there for, top saves going around. That was great.
Oh, it's just, I laughed hysterically the first time I saw it and continued for weeks. It's just amazing.
Sean, you're going to need to throw in a big nomination if you want to beat my record that I set for most emphatic Hall of Fame nomination. But who are you nominating this week?
You just can't help yourself, can you? I won 5 straight, and you get 1 when I'm not even on the podcast that week. I just appreciate that Taryn nominated something that I can put in a GIF in the tweet this week. That's absolutely perfect. Like, she's a team player. You're not a team player. So now I'm going to go for 6-time Hall of Fame winner.
No.
Basically, 2020 has been a tough year. we've all struggled through different challenges. Michelle's been able to watch football and play football and whatever else. The three of us in Victoria.
You struggled to get a
haircut. Beard trims are back, man. It's weird that I could be stuck in my home and yet look so homeless, but that's a whole other topic for another week.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Your nomination. Let's go.
My nomination. So basically what we've needed is someone to rally behind, someone that can represent the entirety of soccer Twitter, someone that can represent all of our interests. And I've been holding on to this one, waiting for like a W League or Matildas specific podcast. But I'm going to nominate Chloe Lagazzo's Nonna. And if you haven't seen the fantastic package that Opta Sport put together, illustrating like Chloe Lagazzo's journey and when she stayed with her Nonna in the early part of her career when she was at Newcastle Jets, I wish Chloe Lagazzo's Nonna was my Nonna. Everybody feels that way. All she does is gets up every morning at 6 a.m. and she gardens till the sun goes down. And that's the life that I want to lead. So I'm nominating her for this week's podcast, and we will put in the tweet, in the description below, the link to go and watch her story throughout the course of the year. It is absolutely fantastic, and I think she is our next Hall of Fame winner.
Michelle, you're up next. What is your nomination?
My nomination is Chrissy Memes from the Ladies League. I feel like Chrissy just gets so much internet attention, and I feel like this is going to work in my favour because everybody loves Chrissy Memes. So that's my thing.
Well, you're appealing to soccer Twitter as a whole here. I like it. Moving on to the final segment, we've had a listen to quite a few different hot takes on our roundtable. Now we have saved not the best for last, but we've saved someone for last. Sean, what topic are you bringing to our W League roundtable?
You should be incredibly grateful that TRT doesn't have a HR department. So, like, the way that you've been throwing to me all evening has just been horrific. And I apologise to the viewers on YouTube, to the listeners on Spotify. Like, the respect that Michelle and Taryn are getting is deserved, but the disrespect I'm getting, I don't know. Like, why are you the host? I don't understand. This is so much weird stuff that's coming in.
Oh, this is brutal. You're just in charge of the edit, so you're going to edit out all the mean things you've said about me, all the banter back and forth. You're going to make me look real nasty. Anyway, carry on. What is your topic, Sean?
You know I love you. That fan fiction's coming, mate. You just got to wait and see. Anyway, the big thing that I want to nominate is, we've spoken about it briefly. I kind of alluded to it earlier. I think Taryn mentioned it as far as expansion is concerned. The big thing that I want to vent about and that I want to talk about is, why the hell weren't the Wellington Phoenix given a W League license this season? So far, and we don't know all the details, the main speculation point has been that the Wellington Phoenix wanted to consider New Zealand-based players as being singular registration. If you're not familiar, the A-League registration and W League registration components are very complicated. Sometimes different teams will have to register certain internationals for New Zealand as being foreign players. Sometimes they don't, depending on the amount of time that they've spent in Australia. What the FFA did is, about 2 weeks before the season started, the season was going to be announced for the Wellington Phoenix, announced that New Zealand players were not going to be respected and registered as naturalised players, the main component of the squad registration of 23 for the W League season. James Johnson, I like him. I think he says fantastic things. I think he's very good in the media. I think it's great that he's in charge now and that he's going to represent football in the proper light. But so far, they haven't provided any valid reason or excuse as to why the Wellington Phoenix wasn't provided with a W League licence this season. We've spoken about needing to get Western United a team and their collaboration with Calder United. They're also very closely related to Caroline Springs because they're a training facility and they have an NPL side. We've spoken about getting Central Coast Mariners back into the league. We had a ready-made team, a team that was literally within a week of announcing themselves as a W League side in the public, in the press, in Wellington Phoenix, and for whatever reason, we've left them out. We did, on Weekend Recap, go through the Melbourne City fixture list, and there's two bye weeks that appear. If that fixture was replaced with Wellington Phoenix, the league would be 2 games stronger, the depth in the competition would be 2 games stronger, the depth of the overall quality of the league would be 1 team additional, and 2 games more for the overall quality. Like, it just boggles my mind that we are now within 1,000 days to the next World Cup campaign, and we are still, for whatever reason, slow to pull the trigger on W League expansion. It's not as well represented as the A-League, and the A-League, and we've covered this a variety of times throughout the course of the last few weeks, Bran, isn't necessarily as represented across the country and across New Zealand as it should be. I don't understand why, when we've got ready-made teams willing to join the league and ready to join the league, that we would slow and delay the progression of the W League season. Some of that, and to be devil's advocate, I'll put this out there early so that Michelle and Taryn can respond, is obviously wanting to work towards a winter season and trying to work ourselves in line with the European year. But it just makes no sense to me, from a football fan perspective, from really any perspective, why we wouldn't be wanting to try and get the Phoenix in the W League competition as soon as humanly possible.
Well, Taryn, throwing to you straight away on that one, do you think the W League would benefit from a Wellington Phoenix side?
Yeah, absolutely. They absolutely would benefit, especially, in the lead up to the World Cup. I guess you're right, Sean, in that it is frustrating. Like, we haven't been given an actual reason. There's been speculation about, maybe it was because I think there was an article that I read about not wanting competition, which is absurd, and not wanting to support New Zealand football and in case they're one of our main rivals. I think this season, one thing that we do have to take into account, and it would be nice if they just came out and said this, but obviously with COVID restrictions, again, we're going back to the professionalisation. If it's not a professional team, you can't ask them to hub here in Australia away from their friends and family, and it's completely unreasonable. It's not something that you can ask them to do. So if it was a situation where, I imagine what would have had to have happened if they'd played this year is that they would have had to play all of their games in Australia, much like the Knicks did in the A-League season. And yeah, maybe, okay, we could have made that work. You can't ask semi-professional athletes to do that. It's completely unreasonable, especially the age profile of the W League is quite young as well. So I imagine there would have been some teenagers in that squad as well. But again, it would have been nice if they'd said that, because I think if they'd have just come out and said, well, we can't do it this year because of COVID, but they're fully in our plans, rather than all this like wild speculation about, Football Australia not wanting competition. It seems crazy because it would benefit the W League 100%, and I really hope that next season that they're involved and that we can get we can put out those buys as soon as possible.
What about you, Michelle? Would you have any reservations on a Wellington team joining the W League at all?
Yeah, probably. I just think financially it's just so difficult, and especially because, like we said, it's a semi-professional league. Flying to New Zealand is not cheap. And have to do that. Every team has to go and do that. Like it's not like every club has the money to do it. I'm sure clubs like Sydney and Melbourne, Victoria and Melbourne City could probably, fund that and be pretty solid with it and be okay. I think clubs maybe like Newcastle where financially they're not doing so well, and Adelaide who have players that are basically all NPL players. It's a hard, thing to think about. Financially, it doesn't seem the best. Like right now, maybe next season or in a couple seasons time, sure, it could probably be better. But I think we have to think about it realistically. Like flying to New Zealand is costly, and then to put them up in hotels and all that sort of stuff. It's there's more to it, I think, than we don't want this team in the league.
Sean, what do you think? Do you think the costs the benefits? What is it? Cost benefits. Do you think the benefits outweigh the costs? Sorry, I always got muddled there. Do you think the benefits outweigh the costs with a Wellington Phoenix side joining the W League?
I mean, thank God you're not my accountant. But yes, look, to be honest, I'm interested with the responses because from my perspective, I fully acknowledge is not the most, up to date and is not the most informative one. But by all means, if people have their own descriptions, they can put it in the comment section below. They can hit me up on Twitter. That's absolutely fine. I think the way that you guys are looking at it from a financial perspective is that the Wellington Phoenix has never made money for the division. That's why they're on their strict, 4-year renewal policy as far as the A-League is concerned. That's why they've got those, and air quotes, David Gallup metrics that we talk about all the time relating to the Wellington Phoenix in the league. I think they are underwritten by 6 or 7 successful businessmen that are part of the Wellnix ownership group that are committed to developing football and top-tier talent within the division itself. I don't think there's any part of me that thinks that playing 12 games as opposed to 14 doesn't provide benefit to the division. I think getting those even extra 2 games in, learning what it is as a young player, and let's face it, like the W League squads this season, they are mostly young prospects. They are, underage appearance makers for the Australian national sides. There's under 23 internationals, under 21, under 19 internationals in those squads. For them to learn at a club environment what it's like to travel internationally and play a game and have that away fixture and that away structure where they're going to have no support, where they're going to have no friendship family groups, where they're traveling internationally, I think that's an invaluable experience that the Wellington Phoenix would have offered this year. On top of that, we now know that the A-League side is playing in and out of Wollongong this season. So it is not necessarily the same cost that perhaps we would have anticipated going into that year. I think, and as far as I'm aware, and I'm more than happy to be corrected, and I'm sure more light will come on their bid itself over the next few weeks, they were more than happy to profit and fund their own resources this year. And they were more than happy to join the league at a loss this year to add that additional team to the competition. I think the part that perhaps needs to be called upon is that it's not an Australian World Cup bid. It's an Australian-New Zealand World Cup bid. And New Zealand's investment does need to increase. And we've spoken previously on this podcast, Brand, about how we'd want to see more from New Zealand football and New Zealand soccer in terms of putting money forward towards the development of the league. I just felt like a natural progression for this year, heading into that cycle that we keep talking about for the World Cup, was adding a New Zealand representative at an elite tier. Their domestic tier is fine, but the reality is their best players have to head to Europe, they have to head to North America to get exposure to the elite tier of the game. They would benefit quite a bit. I think Australian football would benefit quite a bit from the additional 2 games and the additional depth of that competition. I don't necessarily think that the financial costs are as potentially as great as perhaps has been mentioned because they're playing out of Wollongong. It's a bus trip. It's not an airfare for the majority of the teams in the W League competition this year. I would prefer Wellington going in ahead of, and no disrespect, Taryn, please don't say anything too aggressive, going in ahead of Central Coast Mariners, who we know are reliant on Football New South Wales sponsorship, going in ahead of Western United, who we know are effectively going to cannibalise Calder United once they eventually get the call up to W League football. I think they offer a lot more outside of just additional 2 fixtures each week. I think they give us an international exposure, and I think they give us a depth of playing roster that perhaps we've lost now that more players are playing in Europe during our W League season.
Taryn, a question for you, because you mentioned, you're the fact that you're a Central Coast Mariners fan and how you would like to see them return to the W League. Do you think that the W League should focus more on shoring the game up here on Australian shores before potentially expanding to New Zealand, or do you think because of the World Cup that kind of tie-in is more appropriate?
I mean, why not both? Why not both? That would be my.
That's it.
Sort of,
Great.
I think that for all the reasons that Sean said, the Knicks provide something different for the league, something really, really great. I'm gonna wave the flag for Central Coast football in particular because I grew up there. So many divisions, so great. All these local guys should be given an opportunity, but the Knicks do offer something different. It's got to be holistic. Why not everything? I guess particularly for this year, the focus has to be domestic, and irrespective of the finances of the clubs themselves, the finances of players themselves, they have to work jobs and have lives and study, and relocating is not realistic this season for a women's team. Again, unless you're being paid professionally, unless that's all that you're doing, it's not possible. But looking forward to next season, absolutely. Bring the Knicks in. They add that different dimension. They get that experience. Everything that Sean said is really adds something to the league. Our girls get to have international experience. Their girls get to be exposed to a high level of football than perhaps they do in their own domestic competition. It's a win-win for everyone.
Michelle, is there a team that you would want to see, or a club, get in ahead of the Knicks at all?
The Australian team.
Sorry?
Any Australian team.
So why the reservations? Does that sort of tie into the Phoenix in general? And because you did sort of mention earlier how you're a big fan of that sort of one club.
I think just in general, maybe I am so weird about Wellington, a New Zealand team being in the A-League, and this is more because, I don't like the idea that certain players are considered international players because they're from New Zealand, but there is a New Zealand team in the league. Like Costa Barbarouses is an international player, but he's been here for a gajillion years. He's still on our international list, which is very frustrating because then when we go to the ACL, that's one international player down. And then obviously just the ACL in general. I just feel bad for the Knicks because they cannot play in that competition. They've done so well in the last couple of seasons and then, can't be rewarded for it. And I think that sucks. And I think it's just frustrating as a whole. I like going to Wellington. I went to see a distance derby game there once, and I think and that was insanely fun. But I think, if we're talking realistically, it's Australian competition, it's supposed to be an Australian competition, and we play in two different confederations, and that's bizarre to me. It's wild that can happen. But I don't know. I don't really have a preference on who gets the expansion. I would love an expansion, but I think
as long as they're Aussie.
We were saying, yeah, of course. But I think like we were saying, like Taryn was saying, unless you're being paid professionally, it doesn't make sense because how would they hub in Wollongong this season? If those girls from Wellington, if they are semi-professional players, they still have jobs to go to, and I just don't think that's fair for them.
To jump in on that as well, it's not just for them. Imagine if there's a Thursday night game, for example, in Wellington, and it's an Australian-based team is flying out. They can't work on Friday; they're done. So if you're really, for any of this to happen, the underpinning baseline thing is you need to pay players professionally, because if you can't work. If you have to do those things, if you're flying in and out of Wellington on Thursday, Fridays, that's your work day done. So that has to come into it as well, 100%.
I'll also say, like, when we say, like, they get international exposure, that's all well and good, but this is still a domestic league. Like, I don't think they need to have international exposure during a domestic season. That's what Champions League is for. And I think maybe that's something that we should be pushing towards as well, like a Women's Champions League in the ACL, which I think they do have. And I think Melbourne Victory were in it at one point. But it'll be good to see more W League teams within that.
Sean, you've been doing a great job all night. Fantastic job on this podcast. You've been crushing it, mate. Throwing it back to you. Is there anything else you want to touch on? And was that a friendly throw, do you reckon? Was that better than the other ones, or what do you think? You're on mute again, mate. So here's the thing. You see that I bag all these terrible throws. I go for a super nice one, try to lob it up here. Go, here you go, mate. Here's a free hit, and you're on mute. Take it away, mate. Is there anything else that you want to touch on before we wrap up this topic?
No, look, to be honest, I understand where both of them are coming from. I think the challenge comes from we don't have a surfeit of women's funding to be available. So why are we turning down the few people that are available and that are willing to become part of the league? It's easy to say that adding Central Coast would be fantastic, and I'm 100% on board with getting Central Coast back in the league. But we know that Football New South Wales has to semi-fund that competition and that entry, and we know that they don't have the funds to do it. At the same time, as we know, like Western United, like we can talk about way more brand. Their pokey funding, being a part of St George Cross and Georgie's, which is a large pokey venue within Victoria, if you aren't already aware. Like, they have that backing and they have that funding, but does that offer anything to the league? I think where we're at right now, we have to kind of deal with the reality of our scenario and the reality of our situation, which is we need to take whoever we can get as far as international competition is concerned. I understand what people are saying relating to Wellington and that away trip, but the reality is if they'd have joined this year, they'd have been in Wellington as well. Wollongong as well. Given that we are, and we've complained about this at length already, a 14-week season, 17 weeks if you make the grand final, it's basically like a summer job almost, going and playing in the W League competition. Do I agree with that? No, not at all. We need to try and get full-time professional football in as many of our professional athletes in Australia and New Zealand as humanly possible. But the reality of the current situation is you'd be asking them to go to Wollongong. And so apologies, Wollongong Wolves fans, if you're listening in, going to Wollongong for a couple of months of the year before returning to your full-time work or before jumping back into your ISPS Honda Championship, if that is what the equivalent is in New Zealand, or heading over to North American football or heading to European football. I think this is going to be one of those topics and one of those things that we're talking about it now in 2020, December 2020. When we talk about this again in December 2021, we're going to have learnt a tremendous amount about how the different complexion and the different arrangements happen in and around the elite women's football leagues around the world. And I think if we have this conversation again in the lead up to the 2023 World Cup, we're probably going to look back on it completely differently, knowing how that landscape has changed over time and knowing how the exposure for not just the elite Australian athletes, and I think right now the elite Australian Matildas squad is there playing at the highest levels of competition. How do we get our reserve side over there and playing? How do we get our most promising youngsters in the elite training environment? And the same thing for New Zealand football. Kiwi fans, by all means, savage me in the chat below. But, they're looking for the same pathway. They're trying to find a way to get not just their best players in North American competitions or in European competitions, but their reserve sides, their most promising youngsters. How do they get picked up by international academies and by international football structures as early in their development and as early in the process as can be? And I think right now, in the reality of 2020, and 2020 has been a shit of a year, and hopefully this season is fantastic for the league, but reality is, if we can get teams on board, I think we need to be pulling the trigger and getting them on board as soon as possible. And then hopefully next season, we've got Western United joining. We've got Central Coast Mariners getting back involved. We've got further expansion sides from MacArthur and whoever else joining the W League structure. I think right now, we need to take what we can get rather than what we prefer. And that's kind of my stance on it as it stands.
Well, yeah, I agree. It's a bit of a strange one to think that the league is in a position to be turning away franchises, but there's certainly lots to discuss, and we could go on for hours and hours and hours. But that does bring us just about to the end of our W League roundtable. We have covered quite a few topics. There's still plenty more that I'm sure we could discuss on future episodes as well. Michelle, Taryn, Sean, thank you for joining us on this week's episode of the Reserve Team podcast. Michelle, I'll throw to you first. Where can people find you on social media and find more of your work?
You can find me on Instagram at Michelle Morris TV, or you can find me on Twitter at Michelle A. Morris. I couldn't get Michelle Morris TV Twitter handle because there was too many characters.
Oh. Taryn, what about you?
So you can find me on Twitter. Michelle's laughing because currently my Twitter handle is mmtvfan01. So
Nice.
have a lot of fun with that. If you're watching this at some point more than like 3 or 4 days in the future, it may have changed. But you can find me through the Ladies League as well, through all of their social media. So if that's changed by then, apologies. But Twitter's the main place you can find me.
We will have links to your accounts in the description below as well. So if you hit that, hopefully that should still work. Who knows what handle they'll land on when they click it, but it'll get you somewhere. Sean, what about you, mate? Where can people find more of your stuff?
Listen, if at this point, 6-7 weeks into the podcast, people don't know where to find me on Twitter, they're not going to. It's just me antagonising Hungry Jacks at this point. But if people do want to check out the best place to follow all sorts of Australian New Zealand football content, particularly women's football content in the build-up to the W League and Matildas resuming their fixtures, go and check out the Ladies League, where you can find both Taryn and Michelle and potentially me in the comment section below. You can see this fantastic kit that I'm wearing right now is available to purchase. Order yours by December 15th and you will receive it before Christmas, as long as you're in a metropolitan Australian area. Apologies, international fans.
That's a Sean guarantee.
It's not a Sean guarantee. I don't take me to court or anything like that. I don't have the money for a lawyer. I'll represent myself, or Brown will represent me, and we'll lose. But if you want to go and check out all that stuff, fantastic links in the description below on YouTube. If you're over on Spotify, make sure to check us out on Twitter, where you can find all of us to get involved in the discussion. And if you hate our takes, if you hate our opinions, by all means, let us know as well. All conversations are valid. We just recorded ours and put it up on video over a 3.5-hour podcast.
And if anyone is interested, can't imagine why they would be, but if they do want to follow me on Twitter, I am at Branson Gibson as well. And don't forget, please, to check out the reserveteam.com.au, our website, our home of everything Australia, New Zealand, women's, grassroots, kit, football, everything. It's all there. Don't forget as well to like and subscribe. Yeah, sorry, geez. I did so well that we got to the end and I've mucked up the throat. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It does make an impact. But once again, thank you very much for listening to The Reserve Team.